60 Minutes Rewind.
On a cold December day in Detroit, 1967, Mrs. Susan Orlowski received a telegram telling her that her son had been killed in Vietnam. Mrs. Orlowski did not have a son in Vietnam. She had a daughter, Hedwig, an Army nurse. The assumption by the Pentagon that an American killed in Vietnam must be a man was a common one. Most Americans were oblivious to the fact that 10,000 women served. Well, finally, these forgotten veterans are being recognized. Last Veterans Day, the president signed a bill that would give the nurses some kind of monument. This is the statue the nurses want placed by the Vietnam Memorial in Washington. No sooner had the president signed the bill than some people questioned their right to a statue. Even before the bill, J. Carter Brown, chairman of the Fine Arts Commission, had said, in effect, give the women their statue and we'll have to let the Canine Corps have theirs. Women veterans felt not only neglected, but insulted. When you visit the memorial, you will see 58,156 names, most of them men. No man in Vietnam saw combat every day. The women saw it, or the results of it, every day. There are 8 of their names on the wall, 8 who did not come home. Those who did were received by a cold, even hostile nation.
I remember coming home from Vietnam in August of '69, and my dad took me. He said, let's get in the truck and go to town. I'm going to take it to the feed store. So we went to the feed store, and the lady is adding up, the feed that he's bought. And my dad says to her, who's a lifelong friend, Diane just got home from Vietnam. And she wouldn't look at me. She would not look at me. And she wouldn't say anything. And my dad is feeling very embarrassed, and I want to crawl in a hole and disappear. And we get in the truck and we drive home, and I said, Dad, don't ever tell anybody I was in Vietnam. Just don't talk about it.
Diane Evans was 21 when she was stationed at the 71st Evacuation Hospital at Pleiku. Linda Schwartz was an Air Force nurse who decided to surprise her family and come home on leave. Her sister was about to graduate from a state college in Ohio.
And my dad came out on the porch, and he said, what are you doing here? And I said, I came home from my sister's graduation. And he said, there isn't going to be any graduation. And I thought, why? And he said, there's been something happened at Kent State yesterday that maybe you should know about. And I was all in my uniform, and I came into the kitchen, and there was my sister Janet. And she just got up and said, warmonger. And I thought, this is really strange, because I'm not a warmonger. I've been working to help people. I didn't realize that the people at Kent State, my sister, had just escaped almost being shot, that she was tear-gassed in her own dorm.
Jackie Rhodes of the 18th Surgical Hospital Quang Tri went from the heat of Vietnam to an ice-cold America.
When we landed, we were told, we were given a briefing and told not to go out in our uniforms, not to be seen in the streets. And I remember how confused I was at that time, because I thought, well, God, we've done good. We've saved a lot of lives. I know we've saved a lot of lives. We're somebody important.
One reason they saved so many lives. The medevac helicopters brought men in minutes after they were hit. In other wars, thousands died on the battlefields of their wounds. The motto of the medevacs was, get him on the chopper alive and we'll save him. But on days where there were mass casualties, the motto proved untrue. These nurses, many of them on their first duty after nursing school, had to practice triage, make the decision instantly to save who could be saved and to let die as comfortably as possible the most seriously wounded.
We had wall-to-wall bodies. We had bodies. We had to step over bodies and decide whether we were going to work on this guy or whether we were going to leave this guy and try to take care of this guy. And the wounds, we just looked at the wounds to decide who was salvageable.
The triage.
Yes, yes.
Of deciding, in effect, who let the dying die.
Right, yes, sir.
Because you got to treat the guys with a chance.
Yes, sir.
What were those? You had to make those decisions.
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Tough?
Oh, yeah, because we wanted to save everybody.
What they saw every day was a harrowing stream of mutilated and dying men, boys, really, being cared for by young women stuck in the mythology of their profession. Remain above it all, cool, detached, angels of mercy, always giving aid and comfort, never needing it.
When I first started seeing things, I reacted, and I was sick, I was ill. I would go back to my hooch and I would cry. After about a month, I think our defenses built up, and if we were going to save lives and if we were going to be any good to ourselves and our patients, we couldn't react emotionally. So we kept our feelings inside. I didn't cry after that.
His foot was under his chin, and one of his arms was
He was in pieces.
behind. He was in pieces in this bag.
Jackie Rhodes,
And he was
like
talking.
most nurses, has a vivid memory of one GI, one who still haunts her.
And I says, "What's your name?" The only thing I could think of saying to him. And he said, "My name is Cliff." And he said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Jackie." And he said, "You know how long it's been, Jackie, since I've seen an American nurse?" And I said, "I'm sure a long time." And I said, "Well, Cliff, we're going to take care of you now." And I clutched the one hand he had, and he said, "Hold me. I'm so afraid." And I said, "Cliff, we're right here. I'm not going to let you go." And he says, "I'm just so afraid." And then at that point, he lost consciousness and he died. But I remember he was so afraid that it was very difficult for me at that time to let him go. And I had to escort his body to Graves Registration. I just couldn't put him in a bag, and I just couldn't let someone else take him to Graves Registration because I had told him I was going to take care of him.
Maggie Arreola was older than most when she was based at the 91st Surgical Hospital, Chu-Lai, 26 years old. To keep that cool demeanor, she did her job and did not want to think about what happened to the men she met so briefly.
It was the only way I felt that I could cope and come out somewhat healthy and whole myself. And I did that by only wanting to know what the patient wanted to be called and not wanting to know his last name, so I couldn't follow up and find out what happened to him.
You mean you actively did not want to know?
I actively didn't want to know because I knew if I knew, then I could go into the hospital and find out what happened to him. If I found out that they didn't make it, then I'd feel that in some way maybe I had failed.
Did you cry a lot?
No. I cried once that I remember. The one time I did was the one patient, he had come in and we were starting IVs and doing all the normal things and pumping the blood in, and he said to me, "I know I don't have any arms and I know I don't have any legs, but tell my mother I love her." And that just, at that point, I just lost it completely. I kept on working, but that was the one that made me cry.
So what did you do then?
Then he went on to X-ray and pre-op and on out of my life then.
Not quite out of her life. That patient was Lloyd Cantor, a 22-year-old kid from the Bronx in New York City. Lloyd Cantor today. He lost both arms, both legs, and one eye. In 1987, he saw Maggie Arreola on a television documentary, and he realized she must be the nurse who treated him. They spoke on the phone, but he wanted to meet her. A few weeks ago, after 20 years, he did.
Nice seeing you, Carmela.
Good seeing you.
I wanted to thank you. You thank people all the time for things that don't mean anything. You go to the market, they give you a nickel change, you thank them, and here people save your life, and you never get a chance to thank them, tell them that you appreciate what they did for you.
It's the most meaningful thank you I've ever had, and it really affected me. And it made things made things come a full circle, because I could now put a name to something and at least know that there was one person that I helped that is still here.
When Patty Langford arrived in Vietnam, she was a 21-year-old bride. In California, she'd met and married a young infantry lieutenant named Russell Reinell. When she was shipped out, he volunteered. He followed her to Vietnam.
We got stationed together. The chief nurse was fantastic. Said, "Where's your husband going to be?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "I'll find out." So she got us together at Lai Kay.
That was the 1st Infantry Division, wasn't it?
Correct, correct. The Big Red One. And he was a company commander.
Then what happened?
5th of November, '69. I had a break. I don't know if it was a day off or if it was slow or what. And I had gone to, we had a little PX in the perimeter. And the chaplain came and got me at the PX and said, "We have something to tell you." So, I mean, when the chaplain comes to talk to you, it's usually not good news. And that was my big fear the whole time. Something's going to happen to him. They told me he'd stepped on a landmine. What they told me was that his head was blown off. I mean, I don't know. They wouldn't let me see the body. And I mean, I always wished I had, but I'm probably glad that I didn't.
Patty Langford Rynell came home, a 21-year-old widow.
Then I stayed in the Army, though. That was my security, an Army.
Did that uniform draw hostility?
I was spit at a few times, and I didn't know how to handle that. I mean, gosh, I'd lost my husband to this war. I had been there, and then people spit at me. It was hard. I'm not sure how to explain how I felt.
The story will continue after this.
Because nurses were not officially in combat, few people believed they could suffer the after effects of war. No nightmares, no flashbacks. Jackie Rhodes agreed.
And I remember thinking flashbacks. And God forgive me for feeling this way, but I remember thinking, I don't think they really exist.
But in 1984, she was in a helicopter on a training exercise in Texas. It was the first time since Vietnam.
It was a slideshow that you couldn't control, pictures and memories that came rushing back. I saw blood on the windshield. And I remember one particular case where there was blood on the inside of the windshield.
Lots of cases.
And lots of cases. And I remember thinking how the pilots had to look out to try to clear a way so that they could see to fly the plane back to the hospital to bring the wounded back. I couldn't control that and then explain that to my friends who had never been there.
Most of the dreams I have are about my husband, not myself, which makes me believe that I probably wasn't feeling or wasn't living too much for me. I kept worrying about him all the time. I have dreams because I think because I didn't see his body, that maybe he wasn't really killed. Maybe he's one of those MIAs or POWs, or that he's still walking out there and he has amnesia.
You don't really believe that, though.
I guess not, but I have dreams about it.
I think about Vietnam every day. Once I would see one face, another face would come back, and it was like I needed to grieve for the first time since Vietnam, because in Vietnam we didn't have a wake, we didn't have a funeral, we didn't grieve. And I think the grieving process for me started when I went out to the wall, because I could cry.
Welcome.
Is this your first trip to the wall?
Yeah, I can tell.
Like many men, the women Vietnam veterans are finding it helps to exorcise the phantoms of Vietnam if they stick together. In Patty's case, she takes part in a support group of 25 veterans in Linwood, New Jersey.
I don't say very much, but we have an understanding. And they have an amazing respect for the nurses that took care of them. Almost all of them are wounded. There's one guy in the group who's shot 3 times. And he had 3 tours of duty. Well, he was probably shot more than that. But every time when he got shot, when he got injured and he was getting dusted off to the hospital, he said, "Great, I'm going to fall in love with another nurse." And that was what kept him going. I, Patty, take you, Pat, to be my husband.
In October 1988, Patty Langford got married again to Pat McGarvey, also a Vietnam veteran.
And in bad, in sickness, and in health. It's taken a long time. It really has, a long, long time, but things are starting to turn around. And I'm very, very fortunate right now. And I feel good. I married a wonderful guy, And it's like at 40 years old, I'm finally starting to live again. And I'm very, very grateful for that.